Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, May 28th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will be quite pleasant today, with a high of 72.3 degrees and a low of 51.5 degrees. It should be a comfortable day if you are planning to spend some time outside. On today's show, we are digging into the details behind how a startup with ties to Donald Trump Jr. managed to secure a record-breaking loan from the Pentagon. We will also examine the criticism surrounding California and the reasons why the state recently provided oil refineries with billions of dollars worth of free pollution permits. Plus, we have a variety of other important news updates to share. All of this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're starting today with a major investigation that's raising serious questions about political favoritism, federal lending, and the Trump family's business ties. ProPublica, along with the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Reuters, has been digging into a record-breaking Pentagon loan tied to critical minerals. Joining me now is our reporter Ethan to walk us through it. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this one's a doozy. At the center of it is a $620 million Pentagon loan to a North Carolina startup called Vulcan Elements. According to ProPublica, it's the largest loan ever issued by the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital. And the company has deep ties to Donald Trump Jr. and his venture capital firm, 1789 Capital.
Wow, $620 million is an enormous number. What exactly is this loan supposed to pay for?
So officially, the money goes toward building a 10,000 metric ton manufacturing facility in Benson, North Carolina. It would produce rare earth magnets, specifically neodymium and samarium magnets. Those are critical for defense technology, things like drones and satellites. And on top of the loan, the Department of Commerce, led by Secretary Howard Lutnick, took a $50 million equity stake in the company, giving the government warrants and partial ownership.
That's an unusual arrangement for the federal government. What are critics saying about that structure?
It is unusual, and critics have a name for it. The Cato Institute has called this patriotic capitalism or state-sponsored venture capital. They're flagging the obvious red flag here, that the government is taking ownership in a company backed by the president's son. Some analysts have even labeled it state capitalism, which is a pretty striking phrase to apply to a U.S. defense deal.
And I understand. A specific White House figure pushed this deal along. Who are we talking about?
That would be Peter Navarro, the White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing. According to Department of Defense records reviewed by ProPublica, Navarro was the primary driver of the Vulcan deal. Out of dozens of companies the Pentagon was considering, Vulcan's application was the only one initiated by a top presidential aide. Internal sources told ProPublica and the Washington Post that Navarro pressured Pentagon staff to move at an unusually rapid pace.
How rapid are we talking? What's the usual timeline for something like this?
Normally, the technical vetting for a loan this size takes 6 to 9 months. The Vulcan deal reportedly went through in a matter of weeks. White House spokespeople defended that timeline by saying the administration was working at, quote, Trump speed, end quote, to secure the domestic supply chain against China. And to be fair, China, as of last year, produced the entire world's supply of samarium.
That's a real national security concern. But let's get to the Trump Jr. connection. How does 1789 Capital fit in?
This is where the timeline gets really interesting. In August of 2025, about 3 months before the Pentagon loan was announced, 1789 Capital took an equity stake in Vulcan Elements. Donald Trump Jr. is a partner at that firm. Then, once the $620 million federal loan was announced, Vulcan's valuation reportedly jumped tenfold. It went from around $200 million to roughly $2 billion, which significantly enriched its private investors.
A tenfold jump in valuation in just a few months. Has Trump Jr. responded to any of this?
His spokesperson told ProPublica that he does not discuss his investments with federal officials. Vulcan's CEO, John Maslin, also denied that the company received any political favoritism, but the optics are tough. Trump Jr. hosted Navarro on his streaming show Triggered just 1 week before the deal was finalized. And he'd previously visited Navarro in prison during Navarro's 2024 sentence for contempt of Congress.
That's a close personal relationship. Is Vulcan the only company in this 1789 capital portfolio benefiting from federal money?
Not even close, Grace. Research using usaspending.gov data and reporting from the Wall Street Journal shows that at least 4 companies in 1789 Capital's portfolio received federal awards totaling more than $735 million in 2025 alone. So Vulcan is the biggest piece, but it's part of a much broader pattern.
Can you give us a sense of which other companies are in that portfolio?
Sure. One is Unusual Machines, ticker UMAC, a drone engine manufacturer. Trump Jr. sits on the advisory board and holds millions of dollars in shares. In October of 2025, the company secured a contract with the U.S. Army to supply 3,500 drone motors, and that deal is expanding toward a 20,000-unit goal in 2026. Other portfolio companies include Cerebra Systems, which got $45 million, PsiQuantum at $10.8 million, and Firehawk Aerospace at roughly $5 million in defense contracts.
That's a lot of federal dollars flowing in one direction. What's the administration's defense for fast-tracking all of this?
They're leaning hard on national security. In March of 2025, just over a year ago today, President Trump signed Executive Order 14,241. That order invoked the Defense Production Act to prioritize domestic mining. Then the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which they call OBBBA, granted the administration authority to waive certain SEC disclosure requirements and competitive bidding processes for what they classify as strategic minerals.
So legally, they've got cover for the speed. But have other companies been treated the same way as Vulcan?
That's the key question. Industry analysts told ProPublica that the Vulcan deal was, quote, irregular, end quote, compared to other fast-tracked firms. Companies like MP Materials and U.S. Antimony Corporation faced rigorous technical vetting before getting their funding. Vulcan, by contrast, is what the industry calls a pre-revenue startup. It has fewer than 50 employees, and it was manually advanced by Navarro's office.
A pre-revenue startup getting the largest loan in the office's history. What's Congress doing about all this?
There's been a real firestorm on Capitol Hill. In March of this year, the House Natural Resources Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee, led by Representative Maxine Dexter, moved to subpoena Donald Trump Jr. to testify about his stake in Vulcan. But House Republicans successfully blocked that subpoena and dismissed the probe as a, quote, publicity stunt, end quote. So the oversight effort has hit a wall, at least for now.
And I understand the legal landscape shifted dramatically just last week. What happened on May 19th?
Yeah, this is a major escalation. Just 9 days ago, on May 19th, 2026, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche issued a directive declaring the IRS, quote, forever barred, end quote, from auditing the tax returns of the Trump family and their associated businesses. It was part of a settlement resolving a lawsuit over leaked tax returns. And the settlement also created a $1.8 billion taxpayer-funded anti-weaponization fund to compensate victims of what the administration calls lawfare.
$1.8 billion of taxpayer money. How is that audit bar being used right now?
As of today, the Washington Post reports that the audit bar is being used as a legal shield to protect Trump Jr. and 1789 Capital from non-tax investigations as well. So it's expanding well beyond its original tax scope. Democratic leaders, including Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Robert Garcia, have demanded that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth justify the criteria for these federal awards. They've accused the administration of using the Pentagon as, quote, a cash machine, end quote, for the president's family.
That's a serious accusation. Where does this all go from here legally?
The legal battle over the audit bar and the anti-weaponization fund is expected to reach the Supreme Court by the end of this year. So we could see a constitutional showdown over whether the executive branch can shield a president's family from federal investigation. In the meantime, the Vulcan facility in Benson, North Carolina is still moving forward, and the broader federal investment in critical minerals is only accelerating.
And just to bring it back to the original concern, the policy goal here, breaking China's grip on these minerals, is something both parties seem to agree on, right?
That's right, Grace. The underlying national security argument has real merit. China dominates rare earth processing, and the U.S. is genuinely vulnerable on samarium and other critical inputs. The question critics are raising isn't whether to invest. It's about who's benefiting, how decisions are being made, and whether normal safeguards are being thrown out for politically connected firms. That tension is really what this investigation is all about.
A story we'll be following closely in the months ahead. Ethan, thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
Happy to do it, Grace. Talk soon.
Welcome back. Today, the California Air Resources Board approved a major overhaul of the state's Cap and Invest program, and the details are stirring up a real political storm. To break it all down, we're joined by our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what exactly did the board vote on?
Good morning, Grace. So today, May 28th, the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, approved a sweeping package of amendments that extends the state's primary carbon market all the way through 2045. According to Yahoo Finance and Canary Media, the centerpiece is something called the Manufacturing Decarbonization Incentive, or MDI, which is also being marketed as the Build Up California Reserve. It creates a pool of 118.3 million free pollution permits, valued at roughly $4 billion through 2030. And about half of those permits are earmarked for a very specific group of recipients.
And who exactly is getting that half?
According to Consumer Watchdog, that roughly $2 billion share is going straight to California's oil refineries. That includes major players like Chevron, Marathon, and PBF Energy. What's striking is that an earlier draft of these rules had actually proposed removing those 118.3 million allowances from the market entirely in order to tighten the cap and hit the state's 2030 climate goals. Instead, the approved version, which officials are calling Plan B, hands those allowances out for free to industrial polluters.
That feels like a pretty dramatic reversal. What's the economic backdrop here?
It's a tough one, Grace. Retail gasoline prices in California are now soaring past $6 per gallon, and households are feeling squeezed. Just over the 2026 Memorial Day weekend, Governor Gavin Newsom publicly urged drivers to avoid Chevron stations, accusing the company of price gouging by charging up to $1 more than competitors. So you've got the governor hammering oil companies on one hand, and on the other, his own air board is approving what critics call a multi-billion-dollar giveaway to those very same companies.
How are CARB officials defending that contradiction?
Their main argument centers on two words you'll hear a lot in this debate: leakage and pass-through. Rajinder Sahota and other CARB officials say the $2 billion in free permits is needed to prevent leakage, which is the idea that refineries will pack up and leave the state if compliance costs get too high. They also argue it protects consumers from pass-through costs at the pump. But independent economists are pushing back hard on that logic.
What are those economists actually saying?
This is where it gets interesting. Research from the UC Berkeley Energy Institute and Resources for the Future, cited by both Canary Media and Cal Matters, leans on something called the opportunity cost principle. Economist Meredith Fowley argues that because these allowances have a real market value, refineries treat them as a variable cost no matter how they got them, whether they paid at auction or received them for free. And historical data from the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Committee, or IEMAC, shows that nearly 100% of the carbon price gets passed through to drivers at the pump.
So if that's true, where does the value of those free permits actually end up?
In short, in shareholders' pockets. Economists describe the free permits as windfall profits for refiners, rather than any kind of discount for everyday drivers. So consumers keep paying the carbon price baked into each gallon, while refineries pocket the value of the freely issued allowances. That's the central critique from Consumer Watchdog and a growing chorus of independent analysts.
Let's talk about how we got here. What's been happening with industry lobbying?
This vote follows what appears to be a record-breaking period of industry influence in Sacramento. According to daily costs and reports in the California Environment, Economics, and Indigenous Issues Journal, the oil and gas industry spent a record $10.3 million on lobbying in just the first quarter of 2026. The Western States Petroleum Association led that spending at $4.3 million, with Chevron close behind at $3.7 million. That's all concentrated in a single 3-month window.
And has that lobbying coincided with any noticeable shift in state policy on drilling?
Absolutely. In that same first quarter of 2026, CalGEM, the state's oil and gas regulator, approved 245 new drilling permits. That's a staggering 6,233% increase over the previous year. Most of those permits were issued in Kern County, and 154 of them were for what's called enhanced oil recovery, or EOR. Environmental justice advocates are deeply alarmed by that surge.
What are those advocates warning about?
Cesar Aguirre of the Central California Environmental Justice Network has warned that this acceleration of drilling will worsen existing health crises in frontline communities, including elevated rates of asthma and cancer. These are neighborhoods that already bear a disproportionate share of pollution exposure. So the concern is that the state is layering new drilling on top of communities that have been asking for relief for decades.
Going back to that leakage argument for a moment, is there real evidence that refineries are fleeing California because of climate rules?
That's hotly contested, Grace. A 2026 report from Stanford University's Climate and Energy Policy Program argues that the decline of California's refining sector is actually a 40-year trend, driven by structural factors rather than environmental regulations. Evidence from the California Energy Commission and reporting from the Los Angeles Times back that up. Recent closures and conversions, like those at Phillips 66 and Marathon Martinez, were driven by aging infrastructure, declining gasoline demand, and a deliberate shift toward renewable fuels.
Can you unpack those factors a little more?
Sure. Many of these facilities are over 100 years old and would require massive capital investments just to meet modern safety standards. At the same time, California's high electric vehicle adoption has put gasoline demand on what analysts describe as a permanent downward trajectory. And in the case of Marathon Martinez, the facility was actually converted into a renewable diesel plant to capture lucrative federal and state biofuel incentives. So in that case, the company chased a more profitable market, not fled regulation.
There's also this idea that California is an energy island. What does that mean for the leakage argument?
It's a really important point. California has no pipelines bringing in refined gasoline from other states, which makes it a kind of closed fuel market. Experts say that unique geography makes it very difficult for refiners to leak production out of state while still serving California customers. So the threat of refineries simply relocating is, according to many analysts, structurally overstated.
Who lined up in opposition to today's vote?
The opposition was unusually broad. Nearly 30 Democratic state lawmakers came out against the package, along with a coalition of 45 environmental groups. Critics, including the Environmental Defense Fund, known as EDF, and Next Gen California, argued that the MDI, quote, blows a hole, end quote, in the state's emissions cap. They accused the program of, quote, laundering pollution, end quote, by allowing refineries to effectively emit above legal limits under the cover of an incentive program.
And what about the financial impact on state climate programs?
This is a big concern from the Legislative Analyst's Office, or LAO. They warned that by giving permits away for free rather than selling them at auction, the state could see up to a 50% reduction in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the GGRF. That fund pays for public transit, high-speed rail, and community air protection programs like AB 617. So we could be talking about billions of dollars draining out of programs that were designed to help the communities hit hardest by pollution.
Did the board offer anything to ease the political fallout from this?
They did try. To soften the blow, the board voted to increase climate-related utility bill credits for Californians from $8 billion to $10 billion through 2030. But advocates argue that's a fairly modest gesture that does little to address the underlying issues of pollution exposure and high gasoline prices. The fundamental concerns about the cap itself and about who benefits from the free allowances remain unresolved.
When does all of this actually take effect?
The amendments are scheduled to take effect on September 1st of this year, so just over 3 months from today. The new, looser cap trajectory officially begins in 2027. Despite intense pressure on Governor Newsom to intervene before today's vote, CARB moved ahead anyway. So now the focus shifts to the legislature, the courts, and whether any of this can still be adjusted before September.
Fascinating reporting on a very complicated story. Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through it.
Happy to, Grace. We'll be following every step.
Here are some other headlines. Everything is bigger in Texas, including the political upsets. Attorney General Ken Paxton has packed in a punch in the Lone Star State, defeating four-term incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the May 26, 2026 Republican primary runoff. Paxton secured approximately 64% of the vote, proving that a late-stage trump card endorsement goes a long way. This win shocked Cornyn's 24-year Senate career, marking the first primary loss for a Texas Republican senator in over 50 years. This record-breaking, expensive primary now sets the stage for a November showdown against Democratic State Representative James Tallarico, in a race that will certainly be deep in the heart of Texas's competitive future. Across the globe, the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is reaching a fever pitch. The nation is currently battling its 17th recorded Ebola outbreak, which has gone viral across 11 health zones in Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu provinces. Health officials have confirmed 121 laboratory cases and 1,077 suspected ones, with the death toll sadly reaching at least 238. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warned that the Bundibugyo strain is putting a real strain on containment efforts due to a catastrophic collision of disease and conflict. With no approved vaccine for this rare variant, Uganda has already closed its border to non-essential travel after reporting 7 confirmed cases of its own. In a dose of better news, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention revealed that United States drug overdose deaths fell by 13.9% in 2025, totaling an estimated 69,973 fatalities. This mark indicates the longest sustained decline in decades as mortality returns to pre-pandemic levels. While officials like Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are hopeful that billions in settlement funding and the availability of naloxone are helping the country kick the habit, some states like Arizona and New Mexico are still seeing increases of 10% or more. Experts note a shift in habits, as many users are moving from injection to smoking fentanyl, potentially moving the needle on survival rates. In Brazil, workers are celebrating a labor of love as the Chamber of Deputies approved a constitutional amendment to reduce the national workweek from 44 to 40 hours. Passing with a landslide 461-19 vote, the move ends the traditional 6-by-1 work scale for 37 million employees. This change will occur in 2 phases, starting with a 42-hour week 60 days after promulgation and reaching the final goal 14 months later. While some worry about operational costs, proponents say the change is a Brazilian way to prioritize human dignity without cutting salaries. Finally, Canada is eyeing the skies with a new defense deal. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that the country has selected the Swedish firm Saab to provide 6 Global Eye aircraft, leaving American competitors like Boeing in a Saab being fit. The $5 billion deal will utilize Canadian-made Bombardier jets and is expected to support 3,000 jobs. This marks a pivot to ensure military spending doesn't just fly south to the United States. These planes will keep a close watch on the Arctic, detecting threats up to 650 kilometers away. It seems Canada is tired of winging it when it comes to northern security. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.